All right. So, as you know, as with chapter 19 this week, when we read, we finally found out what happened to not only Yun Ling, but also Yun Hong. And so tonight I will be talking to you about the military comfort women. And it's pronounced, it was in the book Jugun Ianfu, and that was it actually translate to military comfort women, which refers to the system of sexual slavery created and controlled by the Imperial Japanese government between 1932 and 1945. It is the largest case of government-sponsored human trafficking and sexual slavery in modern history. Many scholars have argued that the term comfort women, a euphemism coined by the Japanese military, obscures the gravity of the crime. And by the way, the presentation, my material is all from the presentation of Association of Asian Studies, which has a lot of information on this. So Okabe Naoso Bruro, if I'm pronouncing that right, a senior staff officer in the Shanghai Expeditionary Force of 1932. This is a quote from him. Recently, soldiers have been prowling around everywhere looking for women. I have often heard obscene stories about their behavior. As long as conditions are peaceful and the army is not engaged in fighting, these incidents are difficult to prevent. Rather, we should recognize that we can actively provide facilities. I have considered many policy options for resolving the troops' sexual problems and have set to work on realizing that goal. Lieutenant Colonel Nagami Toshinori will bear the primary responsibility in this matter. So this was sort of the first thing where they actually articulated that they would have a specific policy by the military to start this. So the Japanese military used several justifications for creating the system: to boost army morale, to control the behavior of the soldiers, to contain venereal diseases among the troops, to prevent rapes by Japanese soldiers, thus avoiding the rise of hostility among the occupants of inhabited areas. We'll just rape the girls we have, not the ones that are in the town. Comfort stations were established in Shanghai in 1932, then in Japan, China, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaya from our book, Thailand, Burma, East New Guinea, Hong Kong, Macau, French Indochina, and other regions. And in the pictures you can see here, the women up on the left, these are a group of comfort women that were rescued by the military when they came in. And the picture down on the right, those are soldiers waiting in line for their turn outside the comfort women's suite. So here are some of the regulations for the use of comfort stations, and they put them all together. Clause 59, their basic principle to help enforce military discipline by providing ways for comfort. Then they set up, hold on, I just needed to move this. Where's my little thing here? Myself out of the way a little bit. So here they have comfort stations are set up inside the south walls of Nickel Hall. They have visiting days. So you see here, each unit is assigned a day when it's their turn to come. Then they also have the time. It's going to be open from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. You can come. Price time limit is 1 hour for one man. And then as you can see, the Chinese women are 1 yen, Korean women a little bit more, and Japanese women, you get 2 whole yen. You have to pay for them. Every Monday and Friday are examination days. The women are checked for that. This is from an English translation of the Independent Heavy Siege Artillery Battalion's regulation for the use of comfort stations. So there were spelled out specifics for all of these comfort stations. This wasn't just some random thing. This was something they had, definitely organized. Now, I'm going to be telling you the story of Yang Su Lee, who is one of 3 survivors who testified before the U.S. House of Representatives Foreign Relations Committee in 2007 about the violations of their civil liberties by the Japanese government. So I'm going to tell her story. These are some of the highlights listed below it, but I'm going to go ahead because it's a really interesting thing. So comfort stations at the early stage were filled with prostitutes who voluntarily came from Japan. However, as the Japanese army continued military expansion in the late 30s, it turned to the local population in occupied areas such as Korea, Taiwan, and China to coerce women into serving sexually in these stations. In 1938, the Japanese military began to utilize Japanese or local brokers to recruit women, particularly in Korea and Taiwan. It was common that those agents or their subcontractors would go from one city to another, procuring 40 to 50 young girls at once. Once they secured enough women, they would send them to China and other war zones. The most common way to recruit young girls, hold on, I'm going to admit Charles is here. The most common way to recruit young girls in Korea was deceit. That is, making false promises of employment as factory workers, nurses, laundry workers, or kitchen helpers in Japan or other Japanese occupied territories. Typically, daughters of poor peasant families would be deceived by this recruiting and would not know the real nature of the work until they were taken into a comfort station. Toward the end of the war, the military used police force to procure women. Many young girls were forcibly taken. We can see how a girl was taken against her will to become a comfort woman in Yang Su Li's story. She was one of 3 survivors who testified. This testimony resulted in the passage of a non-binding U.S. House resolution urging Japan to accept full responsibility for its actions of its military. The victims' personal stories from the testimony provided us with vivid picture of this horrible tragedy. Lee lived in Daegu, Korea under Japanese occupation in the early 1940s. Her family was poor. She received only 1 year of formal education. She began working at a factory to support her family at the age of 13. In the autumn of 1944, when she was 16 years old, she and a friend were taken to Taiwan, where they were forced to work as sexual slaves for the Japanese military. She remembers that a Japanese man came to her home and called her to come out. Without knowing where she was going or why, she was taken away by Japanese soldiers. She met 3 other girls, and they were all put on a train. They went to Gwangju first and then Pyongyang province in northern Korea. During the trip, Japanese soldiers hit and kicked them. She sometimes lost consciousness. On a ship and again a train, she was taken to Dalian, Shanghai, and finally Taiwan. Various official documents and testimony verified that comfort women were transported by Army cargo ships from Japan and Korea to many places in the Asia-Pacific region. It implies that Japan's Ministry of War was directly involved in transporting those women to war zones, so it was impossible to use any Japanese military ships without the ministry's permission. On the way to the comfort station in Taiwan, Lee was raped, beaten, and tortured. She had to serve 4 or 5 men a day. Some victims testified that they had to serve up to 60 soldiers a day. And they mentioned that in the book as well, that, be lucky you're in a place where you didn't have to do as many. Lee was never paid for these services. According to the Japanese policy at the time, the so-called rules of use for military comfort station, acts of abuse against comfort women was prohibited, but daily violence by comfort station operators or soldiers was common. There were detailed regulations for the use and operation of comfort stations, which is a clear indication the Japanese military was controlling the system. For example, the regulations of Yonghao Comfort Station in Nanjing, dated March 6, 1939, includes clauses of medical examination of those women, the schedule and fees, which we saw officers in different rankings, and the requirement to use condoms. Sorry, I don't know what that just popped up on there. After the war, many other comfort women were murdered by retreating Japanese soldiers or abandoned. Some of the victims were rescued or captured as prisoners of war, and then by Allied forces and eventually sent home. This is what happened to Lee. She was one of them. After the war, she was a POW in a POW camp and then went home. When her mother saw her, she thought Lee was a ghost and fainted. Even after coming back to her hometown, Lee suffered from serious psychological trauma and social stigma. In addition to physical injuries, like many survivors, Lee said that she could not tell her story to anybody for decades, and the shame of her shattered childhood was haunted her through her life. Some people, she said, might think what happened to her sounds like a movie script or a novel, but she assured them that these are true things that really happened to her. She could not think about getting married after all she had experienced during the war. In 1992, another survivor, Kim Hak-soon, testified in public for the first time. Encouraged by Kim's testimony and support groups on behalf of survivors, Lee broke her silence and began to talk about her experiences during World War II. Lee has now become a public figure and an activist for the women's rights movement, pressing the Japanese government for official acknowledgments and apologies to the comfort women of to this day. She's attended numerous international conferences and U.S. congressional hearings and presented her testimony in Japan and the United States. And then here, this is the memorial for comfort women in San Francisco. This bronze statue represents 3 teenage girls representing China, Korea, and the Philippines, standing in a circle holding hands. Next to them is an elderly woman figure in Korean dress looking at the girls. The inscription starts with a former comfort woman's remark: "Our worst fear is that our painful history during World War II will be forgotten." Japan has never done anything about reparations. Japan did apologize, but everybody felt that the apology was very insincere, and they've really done nothing with it. And they're still, to today, 2025, still trying to get Japan to talk about reparations and make a more sincere apology for this. But this was a policy of the government to do this. So that is what I have for you about comfort women. So let me stop the share here.
That was excellent. Thank you, Ginny.
You're welcome. Here comes Derek.
Um,
There we go. It's more people joining us. Hey, Charles, welcome back from your trip.
Well, thank
Oh,
you.
there's Charles. Yeah, hi, Charles.
Did you have a good time?
Terrific trip. Terrific.
Great.
We've missed you sorely here.
Well, not so sorely, but I'm still behind in my reading. So I'll close my ears every time you give me a spoiler.
Okay, very good. All right, so we're gonna roll, and oh, there's Derek. Yeah, hi, Derek.
Hey there.
Hello, hi. Sorry, I'm late. A minute or something.
Yeah, it's more than a minute, but I'm not counting. All right, so this is I'm gonna shut up as much as I can. Okay, I mean, if it comes up, I've got my Yeats poetry book here, so I'll read you poem. But that I don't have to. I don't have to do a damn thing except to have you folks bring up what you want, ask your questions, and let's go.
So I have an observation for the writers in the room.
Yes.
Um, for instance, chapter 19, we get into some pretty serious things in chapter 19. How she was captured, the camp, living conditions, prostitution of younglings, mutilation, destruction of the mines. So it seems to me when I was reading that chapter, the writing was different. It was much more to the point,
Yes.
much more succinct, not as poetic. And I just
Yeah,
want to
much less lyrical. Yeah.
see if anybody else felt the same way.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, and it almost makes me feel like the book is on this spectrum of like absolute reality, straightforward, no mincing words or using any kind of like figurative speech, to like in a totally different land. And it seems like the totally different land, or like, the utopia is the garden, and then the absolute reality is the camp, and it sort of goes in between depending on where she is. Or maybe it doesn't, but it kind of feels like, there's a lot of in the middle, and then there's the kind of garden, and then there's the concentration camp.
Yeah.
I
Well,
kind of
these
read it
things.
as sorry,
No, go ahead.
as a distancing mechanism because, when they gave her the Japanese name, she talked about how she could pretend it wasn't her, it was this Japanese person.
Mm,
So, I mean, the writing is different because it's almost like it's being perceived by a different person. It's not atmospheric, it's not romanticized. It's almost just like recollection of abuse happening to someone else, the
mm,
Japanese persona
yes.
that she
Yeah.
had been named.
So that's a good observation, Karen, because my question is sort of the opposite of that. It's like it's probably because he's he's resolving or showing all the hidden things, the tattoo, the art, her feelings, the love. It's like we're coming to the end here. We better start revealing it. So you can't do that poetically. Well, yeah, I mean you could, but you got to get it done here.
It's also
So there's
kind of
sort of an observation. Like my question was going to be like he's revealing all these secrets. Why? But I mean, he's getting very succinct here, so it's probably the reason too.
Yeah.
It's also kind of the most intense part of the story so far, I think. And I actually read a little bit of the article that somebody posted to our group chat about it was an interview with Aang, and he was saying he kind of wrote the story to be confusing and to disorient you and make you feel like you're actually traveling in a different country. And but like that point, it seems like he wanted to come across very clear. Like this kind of behavior was happening, and don't be confused about it.
Right. I think her because she talks about whether she's an accurate narrator or recollects things. And I think here she's very clear about what happened from the very first of her family being, moving to another place and all of that, that she's got that story down. You're right. She's not dreaming that it's something else or thinking that it's something else. She knows exactly what happened. And also, I thought the Tatsuji's
Yeah.
story was very similar as well, because we got his perspective of what happened with him. And that was also related without a lot of flowery language, what was happening to him and his plane crashing and his commitment to his father to go through with, and his father building the planes that were now like disasters that they were flying in. I thought it was an interesting contrast of him telling his story and her telling her story. Um, and especially right at the very beginning of the first chapter that we read after this, where she talks about, could she believe that she corrected a guy who was about to be hanged about his
Yeah.
grammar? Like when he said, I'm going to be hung, and she said, no, it's hanged. And she's like, did I really say that to him? Like now she's in the present thinking back. And now at least it's nice to know that she does realize sometimes that she comes across a little harsh when she's talking to people.
I thought the
Though
parallels.
grammatically speaking, she was correct.
Yes, she was. I totally get that, but
Oh,
I think if a guy's about to die, I think that's the last thing he
I
cares about.
understand. I
It's like getting
understand.
that who and whom straightened out.
But I think the parallels between the two stories are quite remarkable.
Mm,
Of, somebody that they love very obviously sacrificing themselves so that they can survive, like consciously sacrificing themselves, and somebody bending the rules in order for that to happen. The outcomes were kind of different, but and kind of the context was a little bit different, but the contours I think are like perfectly parallel each other, but just different causes. So I thought, and that it definitely I think explains why the two of them in current day kind of have a begrudging like respect or
mm,
understanding for each
mhm.
other, just because they have deep down some similar experiences.
That's really good. Yeah.
But they didn't know each other that well. And the fact this Professor Tasuji,
Yeah.
I mean, that was a pretty intimate admission.
Mm,
He never had to say any of that, but he did. And I also thought the lines in there that, um, how they contemplated interfering. And, he says, if I had the courage, I would have damaged the engine.
mm,
And the other says, if I had had the courage, I would have asked you to. Um, and then that kind of uh, shows the hierarchy of the call to duty, honor,
mm.
and that they had to fulfill their mission and their destinies.
Yeah. That's good. Very good. And then, of course, there was his relationship with Tarazan, um, who saved him essentially. And it's interesting that they were saved in, Jungling and he were saved in such different ways. You know, and one thing that was that it struck me throughout the book, but here is that um, Aang doesn't really let anyone off the hook. We will sympathize. I mean, you have to sympathize with Tatsuji and the details about him, his relationship with his father, his relationship with Tarzan. You know, yeah. And so, in other words, the thinking is and his always having Yates with him. And I told Ginny that only in the instance if no one was saying anything, would I bring this up? And once again, I violated my commitment to my own version of truth. But the, the idea is that and so there is a sympathy, that we are gathering for Tatsuji, and it's sort of an understanding, right, that he is okay. He's doing his duty, as Karen was pointing out. There was this like, this sense of duty, the sense of honor, and then you know who breaks that but Tarazan, who sacrifices his own life for this young man. and so we're feeling, yeah, there is a, we're asked to be sympathetic to these Japanese figures, and then boom, Aang takes us to the camp, right? And even there, okay, there's the horrific treatment. I mean, cutting her fingers off, right? But then somehow or other, and it's got to be symbolically, the garden essentially saves her, right? But it doesn't. But then, boom, Aang is back, but everybody else gets killed. She's not killed, but everybody else at the camp is killed. And I find that, that's a way of, I love that technique, and I love it how it contributes to the themes of the book, because we're not always saying, oh my God, look what the Japanese did, right? That's not, or oh God, is there any way that this situation just like historically can be resolved? But he doesn't allow us. That's too easy. He doesn't allow us that.
That poem was the one we read in that one class
I was
before,
going
right?
to ask.
I just happen to have it right here. I'll read
No,
it.
but we discussed this in that
We
like
did in the
two or
World War
three
One
courses ago,
poetry.
right?
We did in the World War One poetry
Yeah, I
class.
circled it. I'm like, wait, this is why he likes the book. Give me a break.
That may be at least partially true. Thanks for contributing that remark. Okay, so I'll read this slowly, all right? Just because I'm asking you, but I should have, you know, if I had made up the questions, I would have included the damn poem. But because I had promised not to, I didn't. Okay, so anyway, it's called "An Irish Airman Foresees His Death," and it's in honor of Robert Gregory, who was a friend of Yeats and who died during World War One. So this is a World War One poem. I know that I shall meet my fate somewhere among the clouds above. Those that I fight, I do not hate. Those that I guard, I do not love. My country is Kiltartan Cross. My countrymen, Kiltartan's poor. No likely end could bring them loss, or leave them happier than before. Nor law nor duty bade me fight, nor public men nor cheering crowds. A lonely impulse of delight drove to this tumult in the clouds. I balanced all, brought all to mind. The years to come seemed waste of breath, a waste of breath the years behind, in balance with this life, this death. So, it, think of, and there are quotes throughout from that poem, right? And even though you haven't had the chance to have it in front of you, were there, and then we'll go to other questions, but are there, why do you think that became such a central poem? It's mentioned way back in the beginning of the book as well. What about that poem? And again, some of you have just heard it for the first time, but
I do think that the clouds is an issue in it, because if Aritomo and Yunling are in the Temple of the Clouds when he asks her to tell her story, and the name that the Japanese camp director gives her is actually a lengthy form of cloud is part of it. So I think it's interesting that the whole idea of clouds ties these things together, that poem, and being at the Temple of the Cloud. So sort of now taking us out of the garden and into the sky. It's just interesting, his choice of that.
And thank you, Sarah, for sending the poem to everyone. Yeah, and there's this kind of ambiguity in the poem, right? Like, which in a way contrasts with what we see in the commitment to duty in the Japanese, because he says, you know, I don't hate the people I fight, and I don't love the people I guard, right? And I think I mean, I think that like Eng uses it because it's part of you know, he doesn't want to commit to a particular attitude, like towards the Japanese or towards, towards towards the Malaysians, towards Chinese and so forth. And the idea is that, there's, it's difficult to, understand why this Irish airman, I mean, after all, think about it. He's an Irish airman. The war took place during the Irish rebellion against the English. He's an Irishman fighting for England, right? So there's this, even, I found it interesting that he would choose this poem because it seemed to contrast so much with the devotion of the Japanese to their code of honor, except we find that Tarazan he essentially breaks that code, right? So in other words, there's that kind of ambiguity in the poem that I think he does bring up in the novel. Does that make sense?
It almost seems like it rejects the patriotism that he's expected to have in the poem. Like nihilism is a kind of too strong word, but given that he in the beginning was trying to encourage Japan to acknowledge the comfort woman situation, and like in the beginning when you first meet him, the only reason she wants to listen to him is because he is trying to sound those alarms at home about what happened, which is also a rejection of kind of the
Yeah.
Japanese story of the war. And I think that reflects his disillusionment. He probably feels the same way that the Irish airman does. He survived, but he was supposed to die in the clouds in the air like the airmen did, but didn't. And he no longer feels love, particularly for his country or for anybody else. He's kind of just alone, in a plane in the clouds, you know,
That was,
figuratively.
yeah, but that got a table slap there, Rachel. You said it much better than I did. Good.
It also reminded me of the herons and the to remain forever in flight.
Yes, yes, yeah, which goes back to that bird question that from last week. I did a little bit of, I consulted Uncle Google um, for some research on herons. So this is, I was telling Ginny this before we started. Um, in China, the heron represents purity and long life. In Native American lore, it suggests wisdom and good judgment. And in many cultures, there are three things: patience, stillness, and the one that's sort of like, okay, sort of like a blow away moment, was transformation, bridging the earthly and the spiritual worlds. Now, I don't know if that, that information um, has, prompted any thought on your part, but and if it didn't, then
When the heron comes to pond the first time, and he said, and Aritomo says, "Oh, I've never seen one of these here before," and then it stays there for a while. Um, that's and it is it right when he's giving her the tour? Like it's in the beginning, early stages of their relationship. So yeah, that is kind of like a transformative time, right? She is starting to maybe have a different perspective on the situation that she was in and her feelings um and then Aritomo, I don't really know. He's still kind of a mystery to me.
Yeah, yeah. Um, well, and I mean, yeah, she is going through a slow transformation. I mean, we see that, and it's made more difficult, I think, to fully grasp because of the way that Aang plays with time. Because we don't see in a way a linear transformation. We're brought back so that it's almost like, well, okay, well, how can the transformation really ever happen? And even in these pages, one wonders whether she can ever go through the transformation symbolized by the herons. Yeah.
I was sort of interested on page 218, sort of the theorem of the airman phrase, but the whole idea of duty um, and talking. And of course, I think that was such a huge thing when you're studying Japanese culture, because a lot of people felt that if we hadn't dropped the atom bomb on, them, they never would have stopped because of their dedication to duty. And so in the middle of the page, the section when he says to him, I'll have to find another plane, he says, "You fool." It was the first time I had ever heard him raise his voice. "You and I, we have been given a second chance at what we once threw away. We are no longer bound by duty to anyone. You want me to be a coward," I said. "You want me to abandon my oath and my honor? There's nothing you can do now," he said. "We have lost the war. We simply refuse to accept it." He said, "I cannot put my own needs before my duty," I replied. "I am asking," he faltered, "I am asking you to put my needs first." I stared at him and said, "Where would we go?" And then a little bit lower than that, he says, "I remembered the herons we had once seen flying off to some unreachable sanctuary, but I knew it was impossible. It was impossible." That whole idea of and I believe when the plane took off, the war was actually over. He'd gone on a bombing mission. It reminded me of All Quiet on the Western Front. Where they send them out
Mm-hmm.
when the war is over, and all these people get killed for no good reason. They're not even fighting anymore, and he goes off in the plane to Razin and then disappears there. But I do think this whole concept of duty and honor, because you have Tatsuji's father who kills himself, commits seppuku over the planes being poorly made and letting his son down. And so his son needs to live, so he'll kill himself. And then you have Taminaga committing seppuku over, you know, I think setting, I don't know whether it's because he felt set Yunlin free or whatever, but what he'd done in the war was so against what he wanted, and he did it right in the tennis court that, ruined Aritomo's life when he went to make the garden and wanted to put a tennis court in there. So that it's sort of interesting. So, but the herons, but that sense of duty to me is fascinating. I have to do this, like the kamikaze pilots, which they call here is interesting cherry blossoms,
Yeah.
that they float down like cherry blossom. It's such an honored thing to be giving up your life for this. I
Which
don't know how
also
other people felt about like that whole concept.
And that's what I'm wondering about, like relating to our earlier conversations about how she thinks like she almost has like a duty to continue like the fight against um, like the memories, the Japanese throughout her life. And we've all been talking about like, will she be able to forgive and move on? And I felt like this entire section was kind of holding up a mirror to that of like, look at all these people who did things because they felt obligated through duty, and look at how much pain and suffering it caused them on them because they weren't able to kind of let it go and like think with their hearts about what they wanted.
yeah, that's a great parallel. Great parallel. Yeah.
I want to know what people thought about the part where the visitors come from Tokyo,
Hmm.
and she's
The
like, "F
Japanese,
you."
the Japanese visitors.
Yeah, the Japanese visitors, and um, yeah, she kind of like Aritomo's kind of like quiet and like receptive, but
Excuse me, that's around in the two.
it's 2:30, 2:30, 2:31 ish. It starts at the bottom
I'm
of
surprised he
2:30.
didn't smack her, like to treat his guests with that extreme disrespect and then for him to stand up for her. Like,
Well,
I
I
think
think he liked it. Like I think he would have wanted to say all those things himself, but he had like, that like he wanted them to go back home and say, "Well, he was pretty respectful, but that lady."
That Chinese woman was a
Yeah.
mess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that they constantly refer to as guests of the emperor. Oh, you were a
Oh my
guest of the
God.
emperor, and she's like, no, I was a prisoner. I'm not some guest. But I think it's so interesting the euphemism of you were a guest of the emperor.
Yeah, and her, she's very, and she's very blunt. Like on 232, civilian holding centers. You mean slave labor camps? I'm sure you'll find those in your army's records. And Ishiro Juro says the army destroyed all of its unnecessary documents when it became clear that we would not win the war. And then she says, well, maybe I can help you. I'll show you where the Campete tortured their prisoners. The buildings around the government rest house in Tanarata are still unoccupied today. And again, there is that, that flip flopping that occurs here, that occurs throughout the novel from Eng's point of view. It's like, okay, they come on, ostensibly a mission of respect for the dead, right? But by the same token, which is like, well, okay, I mean, that's understandable. But then he doesn't let it get far at all because you have Yun Ling there saying, excuse me, you're ignoring the reality. So he's dealing with sort of multiple realities in the book, which I think is one of the coolest aspects of it.
I think it also showed that those people were visiting to get the bones of Japanese soldiers, and she's trying to find her sister's site where she was buried. I mean, I would have been as furious as she was. You're looking for those, and I can't find where my sister is, which is her goal to find out and give her sister some peace, her sister's memory some peace. So I can see her being that flippant.
Oh,
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And that I think is one of the great. It's why I love the book so much, is because the characters are, to me anyway, utterly real. Like you can understand, if it doesn't really matter who the characters, they're real in their particular world, right? And there's like, oh God, I mean, you would never say, well, how the hell would you say that? It's like everything is is real. Yes, this is what she would say. Yes, this is why there are disagreements between her and Aramoto. This is like, well, how can he praise her and sort of, verbally slap her down, saying, well, there are moments when that's totally realistic, when it makes sense. Yeah.
He does kind of stick up for himself a little bit when they say, "Can we see the water wheel?" And he says, "Nope, that section's under construction. Sorry."
Yeah.
I was like, "Yeah."
And the idea of the tour too, like it's like, it's that, those different worlds that we were talking about, the stark reality of these pages, right, versus the lyrical, presentation in so much of the rest of the of the novel, right? It's like, no, no, you can't go to the garden. That is not possible from your world. You can't. I mean, and it, it's again sort of like the heron thing, the spiritual, and the physical, kind of, you know, they want to go into his spiritual place physically. Uh-uh. Can't happen. It can't happen. Yeah.
It's important too, this conversation that goes on with him brings up Tominaga Nakamura, sorry, Noburu, Tominaga Noburu, who she suddenly is like, wait a minute, I know who that person is. I know that name when they said how he committed seppuku in the garden at the tennis courts, and you don't have to worry, you can come back now. The emperor wants you to come back and do your garden. And suddenly she's saying, learning of Tominaga's death stunned me. He had been the last link to my camp, the only other person I knew who had been there, who I had suspected was still alive, and now he was gone. And so these visitors, by coming and talking about offering Aritomo a chance to come back and work for do the gardens again, bring out about Tominaga. And now suddenly, by the time we get to chapter 19, we find out that it's Tominaga that saved her life in the camp. And so it's interesting that he chose there to put the name in, bring it back to her in the present. So she's like, wait a minute, I know this man.
Yeah.
So that we know a little bit more once she starts to tell the story.
Yeah. That's really good.
And that's how when she first actually learns about Aritomo, he tells her that there's this Japanese gardener.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah.
That was like, whoa.
I know. I know. I think there were more whoa moments for me in this section than in others. I'm not sure that that's, an accepted, literary interpretation term, but a whoa moment is a whoa moment, no matter how you slice it. Yeah. Keep going. This is good. The more I shut up, the better it gets. Okay. What other things are on your mind? And you can go back, back to earlier parts. Okay, you already had your treat. Okay, this is, this is like exploitation. Get down.
It it reminded me of also earlier in the story where they went into the cave and the blindfold and knowing where they are, like very different reasons, and but just kind of harkening back to that. Like I'm surprised that when she went into that cave, she didn't have like if I had been working in mines and a lot of people I cared about died in mines, I don't know if I'd be willing to go deep down into a mountain for some bird's nest soup. Or have people talk about blindfolding, like that that kind of adds poignancy to that section too in retrospect. Like I feel like I would have read that differently if I had known what had happened to her in the mines.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's really good. Danielle, you've been curiously quiet. Is there something that's eating at your brain that you want to mention?
No, thank you. I'm behind on my reading, so I'm being somewhat shy in my commentary, but it's probably like the wrong pages to have missed.
A lot happened.
Yeah, but I wanted to still come tonight because I think the discussion is the best part of the experience. So I'm here and I will catch up so that I can.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And my God, Derek. What?
I'm kind of on Danielle's thing. I'm there with the reading, but you guys bring up so many great points, and I maybe need more direction, Doc. Maybe I'm not such a self-starter as I thought I was. But I had something.
That'll have to be a
kind of
separate conversation that we'll have to have.
That's fine, fair enough. I had this one thought though, in kind of going back over this section.
Yeah.
And this was the first part of the book where I started to see Aritomo more as a main character rather than always focusing and trying to break down and analyze what's going on with Yun Ling. And then as I was thinking about that, then I was saying, that I was trying to go back to think about some specific points where you can see why Aritomo took her in and started doing all this to begin with. And then I was like, okay, in some ways, Yun Ling is Aritomo's garden. And he's patient, he's working it, he's going. So it's almost like instead of working the earth, he's working a human. And I think that's his transformation a little bit in this story. Sorry.
What do the others think about that? That's a really, I mean, because he is her mentor, right? I mean, very clearly. So yeah, and I mean, it's sort of he's teaching her, and teaching is kind of like gardening, you know.
I think Derek's right. If you look on the end of the chapter 236, 237, where they're talking about why he hasn't gone back to Japan after all those years, and about, him saying he didn't want to be there while the American were occupying. And he says, go back to your old life in Kuala Lumpur, he snapped. You will never become a well-regarded gardener if you carry such anger with you. For a while, we said nothing to each other. And he said, you were friends with Tominaga, weren't you? I asked, what happened between the two of you? And the end of that chapter, again, about the people disappearing, that last part, I left him there, giving one last farewell to the man he had once known, a man who had already traveled past the mountains and journeyed beyond the mists and the clouds. That whole disappearing in the mists and the clouds, like back when I asked about that other chapter when we saw the people disappear. But I think Derek's right. I mean, I think in some ways he is trying to change her and help her grow through the gardening, and yet he still realizes she has to let go of that anger for that to happen. And that's why he asks her to go to the Temple of the Clouds in order to ask her at that point when they get up there to share her story and get it all out. Tell him, tell me exactly what happened to you.
And sort of following the kind of teacher metaphor or analogy, it's like there is that time when for all the mentoring there may be, the student has to grow on his or her own, right? And that
and he said when he's doing the tattoo or when he's gonna do it or whatever, he's talking about he's like encoding the Japanese secrets, gardening secrets into the Horimono, which is going on her back. I mean,
we haven't gotten there yet, Derek. You're ahead.
Oh, I am? Oh.
You are.
There's a violation here.
You're ahead. We haven't gotten there yet.
You're getting the look now. Okay, I'll just give you the look.
That was only like a couple pages. I'm sorry.
You ruined Danielle's experience.
It's okay, Derek.
Well, that's what this all got me thinking before.
You could bring that up next week.
Yeah, all right, I will. That's fine. But I will say that I think that he's starting to cultivate her like his own garden. That was what my
I think that's an excellent point. And even though I'm sort of denying my own orders, I'm giving you a table slap for it anyway. Even though you violated one of the rules.
So Eng introduces the concept of karma. He doesn't call it karma, but the discussion with Tazushi's father in his comment of life is fair, and that he made the airplanes which sent many men to their death, and now his son has to die. So I wonder whether we're going to see this element of karma again and again in the conclusion of the book.
Very good. Very, very good. Yeah.
Something to go back to what Derek had said. I was going to ask the class what everybody thought, why Aritomo kind of stares at her. And then she looks over and she says, I see him staring at me. So I meet his eyes, and then he just doesn't stop looking at her. And I was why is he looking at her? But to go with what Derek said, he's kind of making her the garden. He said he always look at the garden, he always see what's happening. And so that I didn't have an answer to that. I was like, I was going to ask. And I think Derek came up with a great idea of why he's always staring at her like that.
It's excellent. Excellent. Good point.
How about when all of the English and other visitors leave without bringing along their friends when the war was just starting? I thought that was an interesting time. And then the wealthy locals escape and leave everybody else behind.
Okay, that's a really interesting point, and we haven't talked much about that because how, and again, it seems like okay, Aang is never gonna okay, of course we would sympathize with the English who were victims of the Japanese, but he doesn't want us to forget that that very same English. In fact, the English who are still ruling in much of the novel, um, sort of bolted on on the people for whom they were supposedly leading, right?
Well, it's the same as it's interesting about Magnus offered them an opportunity, you know, to work with his group in order to avoid, getting put in an internment camp. But the father wouldn't have any part of that because he was still mad at Magnus about the tea plantation and how that became so successful and he wasn't part of it. But I do think it's interesting about the British because at the early start of chapter 19, when they talk about the fact that there was no need for us to know any language other than English, my father had often told us when we were growing up because the British would rule Malaya forever. And then they were talking about old Mr. Ong, who had become friends with him after the Japanese massacred hundreds of thousands of Chinese in Nanking. But the British were there. What enraged my father more was the fact that the British had done nothing to stop it, nothing at all. For the first time in his life, he questioned the high standing which he had placed the British, the admiration he had always felt towards them. So that was sort of interesting because on the one hand, he was, of course, remember he called himself a banana or whatever, that he was, yellow on the outside and white on the inside because he was very much a supporter of the British. But then, he saw the British, betrayed people at Nanking. And of course, you have Magnus telling us about how the British, did horrible things in the Boer War. It makes for a very interesting start to that chapter with just like you brought up, Lee, about who actually got out in time, who didn't get out in time, and who chose to help other people. Like going with Mr. Ong to his relatives, they went off with him, but it didn't keep them safe the whole time, and then they got separated.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. As Hercule Poirot would say, how are the little gray cells working now? What are you thinking about?
Actually, the other piece, and I mentioned this in the very first one when I talked about the war, but they brought it up here again. Isn't it amazing that when they land, the Japanese troops landed on the northeast coast of Malaya 15 minutes after midnight and 1 hour ahead of Pearl Harbor? So while they were, we're focused on like everything that happened at Pearl Harbor, they landed in northern Malaya and came right through Malaya to Singapore, took over that whole country at the same time they destroyed Pearl Harbor. And they bring that up again, about evacuating people out because the British retreated to Singapore and lost Singapore as well because they were so poorly prepared for them attacking in Southeast Asia.
I was never really a big fan of history, not gonna lie. And I feel like that, Jenny, what you just said, makes me like think about if some of the topic of conversation or like lecture in history classes were on or like half of it was more of like theoretical and like, man, this was happening like I didn't know. I mean, I knew about Pearl Harbor, right?
Good,
But
good.
not about like that the what was happening in Asia, Like I had no idea until this book.
And the same, I mean, I didn't know anything about Malaysia till I read this book, and I had no idea that. I mean, I remember. I mean, the Philippines. I knew they were in the Philippines. I knew a lot happened there from like movies like Midway and stuff, but I didn't
Right.
know a lot of this as well. And it's fascinating when you suddenly realize like all these things were happening at once. Not to mention everything that's happening in Europe at the exact same time this is happening as well.
Yeah, and I feel like I don't know, like there should be more of a like in history classes when you're talking about the wars, like an emphasis on how terrible violence and war is and like not just like on who did this when and where and who and why and whatever. Like doesn't it suck? And can we just not do it anymore, people?
Lee, it's
Please.
funny what you said. Like, I'm a big student of history, and what you said, there are like the last 20 years, tons of really, like you said, theatrical books on the Pacific theater of like horrible things like marches on islands in the Pacific Ocean, like tons of crazy stuff that you're not taught in Mr. Biggs or Mr. Mattern's class and everything. That these books, some are short, but it's just like some really horrific stories of death marches and
Right, the
what
Death March to Bataan. If you always,
And part of
one
it's
book's called
culture.
Ghost Soldiers, but then it's like I forget if it was this section. I don't want to ruin it, but I think it was this section where like we all, well, we don't even see pictures really in books of when the bombs drop. But like imagine if you're in like Malaysia or
No,
not
but
Australia, like when those bombs drop, like we're like, oh, we bombed them. Like that was pretty nasty shit. And like what people saw, whether you're in Japan or China or Hong Kong, I mean, you saw that for far away.
well,
right. Well, that
that
was where
was
Chizurin went up in the plane, and when he looked
Yep.
up in the clouds, he said the sky was all white,
Yeah.
and it was the bomb going off. He
Yeah.
said suddenly there was white everywhere. Imagine, being in the vision range of that and seeing it. You're right, as opposed to a theoretical thing. It was so far away for us, we couldn't envision what it would look like. But they saw that, and he brought that up with Chizurin's plane flying sort of right into it.
Yep.
And I think
you know
part of it
I
is
would
cultural
Go
too.
ahead.
Like, my husband's Chinese, hence the Chinese name on the random white girl. But
yeah
like his family still has, strong opinions of the Japanese, especially on his father, on his father's side. So I think it's also, we're informed by our culture, and
Mhm.
we take a very Eurocentric look at the war
Yes.
because we are generally Eurocentric. But others, I guess depending, you hear from your family and the stories of that your grandparents bring home from the wars and the battles and things like that.
Mm,
Right.
mm,
I mean, when Japan invaded China, they did horrific things there before they got around to World War II. And so the Chinese and Japanese have never gotten along. But I get, that
Nick,
story I remember. So when we were, I'm trying to think what grade I was in, whatever. We all went to Hawaii to Pearl Harbor, and we went out on the boat to the Arizona. And my mother just flipped out and said, "How dare these Japanese people be out here on this boat? Why are they allowed here? Why are they allowed to visit this?" She was furious
I thought
because,
the
I mean,
same thing, Ginny. My honeymoon, like when we took a quick, I'm like, if we're here in the Hawaii, we have to go. And like, there, not to be weird, but like there were zillions of Japanese and Chinese taking pictures, and you're
yep.
seeing the oil droplets come up. You're looking at it, and you're like, what the
yeah.
My mother was
thing?
furious and just
Yeah,
could not believe they were allowed even out there. And this is, I mean, granted, she lived through the whole war, but this was, way after it, and she was very bitter about that. So I think your perspective, when you're in with other people, you get a different view of what's going on.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Ethan. That and Ginny, the because I to a certain extent, I mean, any book, well, books that I really like, usually have a historical basis. I mean, that's always like a shtick, you know, my whole life, right? So it's important to see the the connections that a writer makes between, his art and also the history that surrounds the art. And it made me start thinking, especially what Rachel was saying, because we do look at things through, our own, you know, cultural lenses, right? So, one of the big questions for me with this book, and actually with his first book, The Gift of Rain, is that what what does Aang seem to sympathize with? Where do we get to understand characters and to or empathize with them? What seems to be important to him? What do you see as, like, okay, not just the motivating force that caused him to want to write the book, but within the book, where do our sympathies lie? That's a big question.
I think a lot of his family or loved ones. He seems to have a tie with that, Yunling with her sister
Mhm.
and trying to be with her, and Tatsuji and Tarazan, trying to do something for each other, and Aratomo and Tamanaga, and Aratomo's wife, who, he lost in childbirth with their first child. So family seems to be a tie that he has, that runs through the book, that brings more sympathy to the stories, by their personal lives being tied up in what's going on. And also the other part is everybody experiencing something tragic in their life. And how do you handle it? Almost
Yeah, I was
every
gonna.
character in this book has been through something terribly tragic.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Magnus in the
Julie.
Boer War, Youngling, Aritomo, all this tragedy. And how do we cope with tragedy?
Finding balance and enduring. That's what I was going to say. Like,
Mm-hmm.
definitely, there's a balancing act going on through this
Mm.
whole book about tragic things happening. How do you get there? How do you process? How do you live with and endure and find almost the beauty within some of those things too at the same time?
Nice. Yeah.
Feels like grief seems like what I feel like they have in common. Sorry, I'm
Yeah.
just in the word grief, just
Grief,
loss.
yeah.
In that same article that someone shared with the map of the garden, he talked.
About one thing, Lee, and this again, I have been a technological luddite my entire life. Okay, so you mentioned something that I've, first of all, never been a part of, and don't really even understand, a group chat. What? What is it?
It's
Am
a,
I'm probably the only person here who doesn't
it's a
know that.
chat with multiple people. It's a group chat.
We're
So
gonna start
So
a
when you're
group chat with
texting
you,
somebody,
Doc.
instead
having
of
a
just
group
texting
chat?
to one person, there's a whole group you text to. So it could be like your family and you send things out to them, or a group of
I'm
people
sure
you're
you're
with.
in multiple.
You
Right.
text
It
your
goes to
beloved,
multiple
right?
people.
You text your beloved, right? Right?
So he probably talks to her.
Imagine adding in Ginny, me, Rachel, Christian, Danielle. We're all in one big group chat.
Wow.
And everything you
But
send
do
goes to
not write us
everybody
the
and
same
people
Oh,
comment
stuff
on
that
it.
you'd write to your
actually,
Yeah,
beloved.
we are now.
thank you, Derek. Thank you, Derek.
We are in a group chat right now.
We are.
Exactly. This is a visual group chat.
Okay. All right. Okay. Now I understand. All right.
Back to the topic of conversation.
Yes.
In that same article with the map, the interviewer asked him about the characters, and he said that he on purpose didn't describe them or the garden. Like, he wanted people to
Yes.
create their own. And that also, I feel like, gives you the chance to put yourself in there, in that spot. I feel like, it's so ambiguous that, like, even you could be in there.
And that contrasts with the specific specificity of these pages for tonight. For tonight, right? I mean, it's not. things are much more concrete.
But we
Right.
don't know what anyone looks like, or like what any place specifically looks like. So the
That's very good. Yeah.
experiences are detailed. So like we can, I feel like it's like building sympathy and empathy for people who go through tragedy and yourself if you've been through tragedy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, yeah. I'm
It's
trying to,
interesting you mention that, Lee, because I never really thought about that, but he doesn't describe people. I mean, I think of other books I read where they do a detailed description of each person, their height, their hair color, their expression, whatever. And he doesn't do that. He allows you to sort of picture what you want. And I think it's really important with the garden that we're able to, the borrowed scenery sense of being able to borrow our own thoughts and put them into the garden as to how we see it.
I also
I'll
think
post that article in the
Right.
chat again.
Okay.
I also think he's told us and described some more relationships in this book.
Mhm.
And yet he still hasn't mentioned much of the word love specifically. Like there's no love being mentioned anywhere here, even though we read it through the lines, between the lines, and understand that there's a lot of deep love here, but he never outright says it, the author, that is. Hang.
That's a good point. I mean, I'm trying to think of descriptions, and the only thing that immediately comes to mind is that Young Ling is described as being too chubby by her mom.
When she's little, her mother thinks,
Little,
yeah.
yeah, you gotta, and but what is she like now? Like, we don't really, I don't, we don't know. And I think your point that from having read that article as well, Lee, is yeah, he really is leaving it as detailed and sort of poetic and and imagistic as the book is. He leaves so much to us, right? I mean, he leaves so much to us.
It's interesting. He also said that he would not put maps with his books and he wouldn't translate phrases that he uses. That, they wanted him, the editors were like, can't you put a map in so people know what's going on? And he was like, no, people can look up a map if they want to know. And when he
Lost.
uses phrases throughout the book, like I looked up the one Ang Mo where they were saying they had rounded up all the Ang Mo and those were all the Caucasians, but the direct translation is red hair, and put them in the camp, So I've been Googling some of the Japanese or Chinese phrases that come up in it. But he said he was not going to do that, that he didn't want translations and he didn't want a map. Read the book, and if you're interested, look it up on your own, but I'm not going to spoon feed you what you can find out on your own.
Yeah, I like that he's asking the readers to do some internal work, which feels very Aritomo of him to be like, all right, I'm going to give you the bare bones and you have to find the meaning in this. And I actually, I did have something I wanted to say and I didn't know when to fit it in, but I feel like it sort of relates. But I was sort of thinking about the pacing of all of the terrible things that happened to her and how it goes from these bits and pieces here and there to sort of everything all at once. And I feel like the slower pacing, or maybe it was just that it was intentionally very direct and non-figurative, which also makes me think of that bad review that I got before where it was like, oh, the horrors and the mundane were treated exactly the same. And it's like, no, they weren't. They very much weren't. I feel like the slower paced, kind of like piece by piece where you don't get everything, I felt it more deeply, I think, than the rapid fire, just like this is what happened, this was an awful thing, another awful thing, another awful thing, another awful thing. And it kind of reminds me of like the news feed that you get every day, and it kind of makes me very appreciative and like, it reminds me of the importance of long form storytelling.
Wow, very good.
Thank you. I had to take a pause to like write all that out so it like actually connected when I said it. So
No, that was great about the pacing because I hadn't really thought about that. That's a great point.
thanks.
Well, as you're reading, you're almost hunting for these answers. You have many lingering questions, and then you see a sentence and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
You said before, Ginny, and just made me think about it. Maybe he's not describing the characters very well because of the whole thing we're talking about, the whole memory, forgetting,
Mm.
remembering. It's sort of like a not very well described face or features, even though everybody is very well described in terms of their history and past, like Magnus, Frederick, everybody. But yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And even like, so what do we know about her mother? I mean, what's the thing that, I mean, there's one thing that immediately comes to mind to me, and that is that her mother, has some definite cognitive issues to deal with. And so then that got me thinking, okay, well, so is this, is her problem inherited? But again, what is her father says, well, it doesn't really matter that you haven't seen your mother because she wouldn't know who you are, right?
I
And
think the
that,
mother though lost it over what happened in the war, over losing her children,
yeah, yeah,
Did it
yeah,
and
though?
I think she's had it
That
more or less a breakdown, not so much. Yun Ling is that primary progressive aphasia, which is a very
yeah,
specific thing
yeah,
that she has. Um, but mom, I felt like mom had like a nervous breakdown and just never really recovered.
yeah,
See,
you're
I
right.
almost wonder if that's selective memory because
Mm.
she
Mm,
really wants to blame her dad. Like, if you had took us when Magnus asked, this
yes.
would not have happened to mom, right?
Hmm.
And I mean, there's a strong genetic correlation with these kinds of things. And I almost wonder if she is justifying that with her mom. And, now that she's seeing it
Mm.
herself, having to square
Uh,
with some of the judgment that she made on her family. So that's kind of where I see some real unreliable narrator potential in that
yeah.
book.
And there's that, to me, the pervasive fear of not remembering, and I think it that's one of the things that most strikes me about this book, that that remembering is so you know critical to us as human beings. Just
Yes, Lee?
you're that's a yeah.
I think it's interesting too, bring up about her mother, how in Chinese culture, it's very important to be respectful of your parents
Mm,
and have a duty to her parents. And like when she doesn't go back for Chinese New Year
mm,
and she doesn't, come when her father asks her to, it's interesting, she once again sort of that renegade personality of I'm going to do my thing and I'm not going to do what you're asking me. But that's considered, a very bad form to not be respectful to your parents. And she should be taking care of her mother like her father. Why isn't she there taking care
mm.
of her mother and being with her father and being a dutiful daughter? Once again, that sense of duty that people have. But it's interesting that that Aang has chosen to portray her as somebody who does not have that attachment to her parents, and pretty much she hides away from them.
Mm.
And maybe because it's the loss of memory, seeing her mother makes her only feel worse about herself. But she also doesn't go see them early on before she knows this happens. Back when she's like living with Magnus and they want her to come back, she doesn't know there's anything wrong with her. And yet she will not go see her parents and spend time with them. And people are sort of shocked, like, what do you mean you're not going to go to your parents?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's and yeah, and that's a question. So I think many of us have had throughout, like, okay, why does Aang have her separate in a way from her parents? I mean, because it's always an author's choice, right?
Right.
I mean, she could have. There's so many other ways to deal with it. I mean, that the easiest thing would be to have her visit. The second thing would be to have her show more connection or sympathy with the parents. But there is um, and I'm not sure I totally understand why that separation exists, although I think it's a really interesting part of the book. I mean, why does this connection seem to have broken down? and maybe I'm just missing something.
Well, neither of them went to the camp. It was just her and her sister. So maybe that's why that was the start of the rift, that they will never be able to understand what she went through. Unless I'm forgetting something and they did.
No,
They,
no, no, no.
No, you're right. They got separated, right? Like they took the girls away and left them, and
Yes.
so they've been torn apart. Um,
And
And
wouldn't
then-
goes,
they also
yeah, and
send
it
to
goes
that
back
camp
to what you were.
specifically because of what her father did before the war?
Mm, yeah.
Because they
Say
said
that
the
again,
only
Rachel.
people in this camp, I'm sorry?
I just missed what you said.
Is it the only people in that camp were people whose parents or fathers had angered the Japanese?
mm.
Mhm.
So there could be you know, if we had gone with Magnus, or if Dad hadn't, you know, pissed off the Japanese, then we might not have gone to this kind of camp.
Mm. Mm. Yeah,
Just to let you know, it's 8:50. Everyone's,
that's okay.
I know, I'm just my job. I'm supposed to.
I
remind you.
understand. I understand, and I'm
I'm
into.
doing my part.
I have another question is
Well, go
why,
ahead, Ray.
why is memory so important? Like who cares if you start to lose your memory?
Oh, isn't who you are like what you remember?
Who cares? As long as you like, I feel like you have like, okay, I just want to know, what people think.
So it's insane. My wife's father died of Lewy body, which is like Alzheimer's. It was insane. It changed my wife's life. She's like, I am not going out like
I
that.
think to answer Lee, I'd say, and what you're talking about, Ethan, I think the people around the situation is what happens. I don't think maybe for the person who's losing the memory, it's so bad, but for
It's
the
the
people
people
around,
around.
it's a nightmare.
Yeah, my mom.
Lewy body is what Robin Williams died of, Lee, and it's very not well known. Everybody thinks it's Alzheimer's. It burns the brain up like that. And when you see this person, it's insane. Like I was like frightened.
Yeah, and don't forget, memory isn't just like coming up with conversations and stuff.
Yeah.
It's eating,
Everything.
swallowing, breathing. It's everything. Memory is, you have to have it. If you didn't have it, you wouldn't, people wouldn't be hitting home runs, Doc, muscle memory, right?
Wearing super great mustaches. You can't shave if you can't remember where to go.
Do you think the fear of that though, like if you're starting to lose your memory and then you're like, ooh, like this is gonna be what's gonna happen, that maybe makes it happen? Like if you start losing your memory and you just kind of go with it, like what would happen?
Well, I mean, to me,
You
it's
end each class with this crazy shit, Lee.
Ethan's cursed twice, by the way, on the call. I don't know if anyone's keeping track of the curses. Ethan's cursed twice.
I know. I know that, and I
No, because like I was gonna bring it up when Lee and Doc said that. We're like, has anyone lost someone with Alzheimer's or Lewy body, whatever? Like, if you haven't, like you and Lee, no offense, like you say, like, well, yeah, what? But like, if you've seen it and I saw it, it is insane, which made me curse. So sorry.
Yeah, and my mom died of Alzheimer's.
Yeah, yeah, it's
And I
insane.
think my answer is why is memory important? It's sort of because it's who you are. Who you are. Like, when I think of and again, how could I possibly put myself into her situation, right? But the idea is that it was like she was losing herself, and we saw it, and I think that's partly the fear of Yunling, that she would, lose herself, that at a time when she's trying to sort of come to understand herself, or to better understand herself through the writing of this book, right? Because we always have to remember this is a writ, she's the writer. She's not just, the main character. She's the writer. So I think it's that you know I think that I mean, God knows, I mean, every First thing I do when I wake up in the morning is I do the New York Times crossword puzzle, right? And part of that is to keep the brain functioning. But it's also, but during that, like there'll be sometimes when I'll know damn well that I know the answer, and it'll usually be like some historical person or something like that. And then I'll get, it's like, oh my God, you can't remember. You can't remember this, right? And even those little moments, I mean, they make me nervous, so then and I'll just say, all right, okay, damn it, I'm going to get the Saturday crossword done in 30 minutes. Okay, that's going to show you, brain. So I do.
Danielle, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I did want to jump in real quick. So I'll kind of bridge the two conversations with my thoughts, and I'm going to give myself a task for next week. But I'm curious if some of what's going on here with memory is also that memory is not just physical recall of things, but also the emotional trauma that goes along with memory. And so Young Ling does not want to see her parents after she comes out of the camps. And I wonder if, we laid the ground for learning about the comfort women. I wonder if there's an aspect of shame that goes along with all that was lost in that trauma. And so my goal as I read through the last 30 pages and then the end of the book is to see how that might translate into how she understands herself and why she also is struggling with the loss of her memory. You would think she'd want to let the memories of what happened, let them go, and she'd be willing to release those. But at the same time, your trauma becomes a part of your memory such that it is a part of who you are. And be it bad or good, releasing it is releasing a part of yourself. And so in that way, can you ever really fully heal trauma? Or do you have to carry that shame or that, emotional weight and mental, psychological trauma as well that happened? Does she have to carry that through her interactions for the rest of her life? Is she able to love? How does it impact her relationships, being able to receive physical touch or, those types of things where I think memory is bridging all of that, but also this idea of shame. So I'm going to explore it as we finish up next week.
I also think that if I remember correctly, her father would not discuss with her what happened in the camps. So it would be interesting if the mother could think and could talk to her. Would she be visiting her parents? But her father just wouldn't even acknowledge what she went through. So I can see her not visiting him. And the mother has no concept of what's going on. But would it be different if the mother could have talked to her and could have understood? And it'd just be interesting to know if it would be different.
And that's a good choice that is a choice that, Eng has made, right? I wanted to, I think that's a cute dog there, Ethan.
This is Luna.
Luna. Oh, hi, Luna.
By the way, Ethan,
That's there you have there, Derek.
That's the young Charlton Heston lighting room that you're in. I'm telling you, you exude young Charlton Heston in that light. That's the angle and the look.
Thank you, Derek. I'll use a mustache. I'm gonna grow my mustache. I'm gonna grow my mustache for you. Yeah, I should have done November. I'm 11 days in.
Gotten into, I think tonight is one of the, has included some of the weirder statements that I've had in all the times I've done these classes. But
Derek and I have to neutralize all the cranium activity, okay?
One thing I wanted, I don't know if anybody did this, but remember last week I said I was thinking about me, and Ginny had sort of backs me up on this. I was thinking about the novel Horse. Did anybody look it up, or you know?
Looked it up. It looked
You did,
cool.
Ethan. Uh,
Looks
Ethan?
good.
Looks good.
Looks good. I sent you Zorg.
How cute your dog is. He is cute.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's just something to think about. But it's
Well, I saw Greg Sampson at GAPC Day, and he was advocating for the rights of spring by the Rite of Spring by Michener,
Ooh, we could do like all the Mitchners too.
which does hang out in Doylestown, Willow Grove. It's certainly a local.
God, we could do like a field trip.
We
You
could.
could. I could lead y'all.
But anyway, I just throw that out there that he put in his 2 cents for that. He's been doing a CPR course, so he hasn't been able to join us
Oh, okay. Great.
teaching CPR.
Okay. All right. Well, it's probably time that that we say goodnight. Okay.
And next week, the conclusion of our book. So we'll hopefully have many of our questions answered. I'm gonna make a list of my questions I have and hope they're all answered.
Is it the last class?
Yeah.
It's the last
Now,
class.
I've got to throw out one other thing because this actually got my brain percolating. Tonight. It's been a while since we've looked at, and this is a total. Ginny knows nothing about this. I've been thinking, last time when we did the British poets, I thought that was really cool, and it was different in that it didn't really require the kind of time that you all give to reading and thinking about the book. So then I started thinking, whoa, we could do a class on Irish poetry, like Yeats and Seamus Heaney.
What about
Okay.
limericks?
I like that.
No limericks.
Be interested in that
Unless
class. I'd be interested in the class too that like I love the history lessons that come with these classes, and I would love something similar that talks about how to like, because I'm still feel like I'm trying to learn how to review and analyze literature. So I would be really interested in a class that sort of dives into and gives kind of like a backbone for how to
both Yeats is tied, of course, to the revolution in Ireland and to the creation of the Irish Republic. And Heaney is heavily involved with, well, he actually was born in Northern Ireland. So much of his poetry, covers the troubles in Northern. I mean, and it's just it just came out of my brain.
No, but I second what Sarah said. I actually want a class that sort of like sits like read whatever, but I haven't done this since GA in college, right? Like that.
Yeah, how do you do it? How do you
that shows us again how to analyze literature. Like for example, like me, I read this thing when I went to Germany, right? Fully. So when Derek was saying the thing, I was like, oh, but like I want to read during when we're told to, because then you remember it better, but also reading it very differently and being
Right.
able
How what you're looking for when you're reading
Yeah.
it, and how to tie themes together, whether you're looking for themes and characters and all the literary techniques they're using.
I felt smart just remembering your poem from the previous class. I was like, oh wow, I learned something.
And
I remember that poem as well. I was like,
Yeah. That'd be cool.
I chose it, so I have to remember the damn thing.
If you choose horse, maybe do horse, but then teach us, okay, in this section, here's what I, Doc, and Ginny circled and studied, and
that would be cool. Yeah.
Yeah, we could definitely do that. I think that's a great idea.
Then we'll do Mad Libs and Limericks by Lee and Ethan.
Yeah, I might miss that class, but anyway.
Oh, come on.
Just kidding. Just kidding.
I have many books of limericks.
I have lots of Mad Libs.
Why does that not surprise me, Lee? Why does that not surprise me? Okay, everyone. Wonderful class.
Yeah,
Thanks
great.
a lot.
Look forward to seeing you all next week.
Next week.